everybody. Welcome to lesson number 9 in the political science video blog series here at Politics with Roger. Thank you for checking us out and thank you for tuning in. Lesson number 9 here is going to be an overview of the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights. Most people know it as your free speech amendment, but there's really so much more to it. I'm going to raise a handful of issues in contemporary United States history and even in really up to date, right up to the moment today, that involve the First Amendment. I can't take a deep dive into each issue because if I did, I could make a video that goes a couple hours. I mean, we could talk all day long about the philosophy of the First Amendment and its application and the different situations in politics and in current events where it's applicable. So, we'll take a look at some of those things. But first, let me just read word for word what your First Amendment says and is, and let's talk about that. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Okay, so short paragraph, but it really said a lot. The first thing I want to raise is the establishment of religion and the free exercise thereof. What it's basically saying is you're allowed to practice any religion that you want within the United States. And the federal government is there to protect your right to do so. A lot of people like to say the separation of church and state. It's kind of a myth. I mean, the federal government is there to protect your right to practice religion in any way that you would see fit. When I say any way, too, we'll circle. We're going to talk about the limits last. So I might say anyway, but there are limits to all of our rights and liberties here in this country, but we'll talk about the limits last. But a note about this too: the first colonists that came over from England were really big on this. That's why it's the First Amendment, and really the first point that's raised in the very first sentence of the amendment is the freedom of religion. Christians from England were not allowed to practice their religion the way that they saw fit. So they quickly established this right here in what they called at the time the New World. So freedom of establishment of religion and the free exercise thereof. That's a big point. Now, there is freedom of speech in the First Amendment. No law respecting the free exercise of thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, meaning that we are supposed to have a free press in this country as well. And it gets to be a little bit deeper conversation of why the press is so messed up in this country. To give a quick overview is because it's a corporate press, and the corporate press is controlled by factions of the federal government. So it appears that the press is free, but they're not. They're actually being directed, and that's called corporate fascism, and we are going to get into that template a little bit later. So I don't want to chase that rabbit too far down the rabbit hole yet. But our First Amendment specifically states that we have the freedom of speech, and the press is supposed to be free. That means that if the president or a senator or a governor or a mayor or whoever is in power, whoever is serving the people, our elected officials, don't like a particular journalist or a reporter, they're not allowed to simply silence them or throw them in jail. And that might not seem like a big deal because you've never probably heard of an American journalist or reporter just being thrown in jail because someone in power didn't like it. But let me tell you, around the world, it happens all the time. Journalists are murdered all the time in other parts of the world. And it really takes a lot of courage to be a journalist in many countries around the world. just as I mean, just to give an example, journalists in Mexico that speak out about the cartels are constantly being murdered. And they're doing a really good job because they're trying to expose corruption, uh, just the activities of a mafia, which include murder, drug trafficking, human trafficking, just a lot of nasty stuff. And brave journalists who expose this put their lives at risk. And there are a lot of brave journalists here in the United States too. That's not to say journalists never lose their lives. Hello, Andrew Breitbart, but I'm not going to chase that right now either. These comments are all for later classes. Our First Amendment also gives us the right of the people to peaceably assemble. It doesn't matter in the size of the group. This is a First Amendment right, and this particular issue and right is being firmly challenged right at this moment. I'm making this video. It's what is it? It's mid-May in 2020, and we're going through the coronavirus manufactured crisis here in the United States. And what we're seeing is, governments, particularly my government in California, is telling people that we must stay inside, that we cannot assemble, that we cannot get together. They've stopped us from going to churches. These are all First Amendment issues that are going on right now. Now, if they asked us voluntarily, hey, there's this dangerous virus going around, we would really like for people to cooperate and not, that's a whole different story. But they're forcing us at this point, and that is an infringement on our First Amendment rights. And it's something that we're actually fighting right now on the street. But that's a practical application. We do have the right to peaceably assemble. And then also part of that is redress of government. That's why you see in America people protesting, and that's why you don't see people in other countries protesting very often, because people in certain countries, China, Iran, Turkey, I mean, I'm just throwing some off the top of my head, North Korea for sure, they risk their lives to speak out against their government, and they risk their lives to demonstrate against their government. You may have heard of Tiananmen Square in China. If you haven't, take a look at that. And there's many examples. I mean, even these yellow vest protests that have been happening in France, the government of France has used brutal tactics. Maybe not killing people, but they beat them up. They beat people up that are out there expressing their grievances against the government. And this country is amazing. I mean, you think about it, that we have a government system where you actually have the right to go out on the street with a group of your friends and tell the government that you're upset at them. I mean, it's truly a miracle. I mean, I know I kind of fawned over the 1776 constitutional system that we are subject to, that we live under in video number 6, but it truly is an amazing thing, and it's protected by your First Amendment right to redress and to protest the government when we have grievances. Now, we'll talk about the limits again. Talk about the limits of this to a second, but we raised the issue. I want to talk about a few modern examples of where the First Amendment is prevalent, and why the First Amendment is not just applicable, but it's front and center in as an issue in many of our current events. People talk a lot these days about internet censorship, and that's a big issue. Can people say whatever they want on the internet? And the argument is, well, a private business has a right to censor your speech because they're a private business, which is a good argument. That's really true. But what if that private business is really just an extension of the federal government? Again, that gets into corporate fascism, which we haven't covered yet. But these are the arguments back and forth. How would you feel if you were on your telephone? I mean, people don't really use telephones much anymore, but how would you feel if you're on your cell phone having a conversation with one of your friends, and somebody was listening in on it, a police officer, someone from the federal government, they didn't like what you're talking about, so they just cut off your phone? That hasn't happened yet, but that's how people feel when their posts are taken off of social media, when they're trying to, again, just exercise their First Amendment right. So there's all these issues that are prevalent in today's 2020 America, and these all come back to your First Amendment right, censorship. I brought up the coronavirus lockdown, how people are not allowed to assemble. There's also laws about censoring what we'd call indecency. When I was growing up, it was really big, when music came out and people started cursing in music and, using the F word and the S word, and you guys know the words, so I don't have to repeat them. What right the government would have to censor those words. And I'm not taking a position here because I don't particularly like quote unquote art that's vulgar. But do people have a right to create that art? Well, they really do, because we have a federally protected First Amendment right. There's a famous quote out there, and I don't know off the top of my head who said it, but somebody said, the problem with liberties is that people will exercise liberties, meaning it's great that we have liberties and it's great that you have the freedom to do what you want, but everybody else also has the freedom to do what they want, and sometimes they're going to do things that you don't like. And that's the country that we live in, and but having the liberty is better than not having the liberty. Most people agree about that. But vulgarity, at what point does a government have to step in and say, no, we're not going to allow this to be shown? At what point does even a private business, because even at the end of the day, even though they're giant corporations, NBC, ABC, CBS, some of the largest television stations seen by millions and millions of people, what responsibility do they have to say, look, we're not going to show this, we're not going to show that, we're not going to allow a television show to talk about these specific issues because there are young people watching, and young people shouldn't be exposed to these kind of issues. So, and that kind of just brings us, and one more issue I want to talk about is anti-war. What if the country is fighting in a war, fighting for its life, and you got people within the country saying we shouldn't even be in this war? And again, I'm not taking sides here, because sometimes sometimes they may be right, sometimes they may be wrong. People during World War II, pacifists, they were out there, and they were saying that we shouldn't be in World War II. But 50 years, we're getting on 80 years after the fact, many people would say, look, it's good that we fought in World War II. And the country was at risk at that time, so maybe those people were wrong to even be anti-war. But then you fast forward to the Vietnam War, where there were a lot of, again, anti-war folks, and even the Iraq War and the war in Afghanistan, which, oh man, open up a whole nother look, these are all controversial issues when you get to it, and that's why politics is fun and political science is fun, and that's why it's great to debate history. But we're talking about the First Amendment today, and what about when people are anti-war and talking about, hey, we shouldn't even be in this war, while soldiers are actually dying in a foreign country fighting a war to support our country, or to strengthen our country, or to protect our country. I mean, these are really these are huge issues. I mean, these are great issues to discuss. There typically is no right or wrong answer. There's just really a lot of opinions that people have, and that's okay. That's the country we live in, and thank God we all have the right to express ourselves. Now, something else I want to say is, oftentimes people will express themselves, and then they'll experience some kind of backlash. That is, people aren't going to like what they say, so they're going to respond to what they're saying, and sometimes it's not so nice what they're saying, and then people will say, hey, wait a minute, I have a right to freedom of speech. It's not right for you to respond to me in that way. Well, the freedom to respond to speech is also free speech. So, if somebody says something that you don't like, well, you can respond to them, and you might say something that they don't like, and that's your right. And you run the risk when you do speak of having people respond to what you're saying. People might hate what I'm saying right now, so I'm taking a risk that people will come on here and say mean things to me on the comments, whatever. That's how this country works, because you have free speech, they have free speech, and I have free speech. At the end of the day, I think most people agree, again, that more liberty is better than less liberty. And if you don't believe me, then go move to China and see how that works for you. And that's not a threat. That's just, see how that works for you. because our system is different than most other systems, and we have a lot more liberty, and we can say a lot more than can be said in most other countries. And I think that's a blessing from God, and thank God that we have that. So I just want to conclude with, what are the limits to speech? I mean, there must be some limits. I mean, we can't just go out there and say anything. You can't go out there and say, I don't like my neighbor, get online and say, hey, everybody, help me kill my neighbor. That can't be legal, can it? And the answer is no, it's not legal. I'll come back to what we were talking about, the limits, what Thomas Jefferson had mentioned, and I don't have the quote word for word, but essentially, and this goes for a lot of our liberties, that our liberties end at the place where we start to infringe on another individual's liberties. So if your speech causes somebody to get hurt, well, you're not entitled to that speech. I mean, they say that you can't go into a theater and yell fire. Well, maybe you can, but if someone gets hurt, if you cause a stampede and somebody dies or somebody gets injured because of your words, because of what you did, you will be liable for that. So I recommend that you don't go into a theater and yell fire. There's also something called insurrection. You can't, especially in the day of social media, you can't now we're allowed to protest our government, but what we're not allowed to do is get out there and say, hey, how about you and me and 50 of your friends and 50 of my friends, how about we get a little militia together and attack the governor of California, attack the president of the United States. That is illegal. That's an insurrection, and don't do that. You will be thrown in jail. If you do that, you might be thrown in jail for treason, which is punishable by death. So don't do that. But there are limits to our speech. It's not a free-for-all, and you can't just say whatever you want whenever you want. So you got to be careful, because your speech, you can be liable for your speech, and your liberties end at the point where you begin to infringe on other people's liberties and rights. So, and again, that's why we have courts to sort a lot of that out when those events happen. So anyway, again, I know I could have talked about these issues a lot more. We could dive even deeper into a lot of the issues that I raised. But again, this is an overview of the First Amendment. This video is getting close to 20 minutes, so I think it's good to kind of end it there. And believe me, we're going to be talking about the First Amendment over and over in the more advanced classes and the more advanced concepts. But I hope this gives you an overview of what the First Amendment is, the rights that it gives you. It's not just freedom of speech. It's really a whole handful of rights that come with your First Amendment. And I hope you understand how it's applicable to modern society, and how you can look at historical events and see how it was applicable to historical events. All right, guys, so thanks for checking out lesson number 9 in the Political Science video blog series here at Politics with Roger. We'll see you in lesson number 10, the Second Amendment.